Kajam and Replit are holding a game jam. Anybody is open to join, and the grand prize is $10,000. In this game jam, we must create a game from scratch in 7 days, but the catch is that said game has to be submittable on Replit. Replit is an online coding IDE that allows you to collaborate similarly to Google Docs, and it supports a host of languages and libraries for making games. And although I could technically build a game using Unity and export it to HTML, I don't really want to do that. So, I'm going to, for the very first time ever, create a game with no engine, with $10,000 on the line. Sounds like a great idea. And this video is sponsored by Replit and Kajam. Although anybody is allowed to join this game jam, there are several other game dev YouTubers participating, such as the mustache-twirling Vimlark, creator of Monkeys with Guns, the Python master Tech with Tim, and Polymars. I don't think he's done anything interesting.
Hey!
Moving on, at the beginning of this week we'll be given a prompt for the game and development begins. Well, I guess we just wait until then. Have I told you about Couch Combat? Couch Combat is the game I've been developing in Unity for almost 2 years now and is available to wishlist on Steam. And don't tell anybody I told you this, but I'm going to release it completely for free, although I haven't announced that in any devlogs as of yet, as I just made that decision. The game is a split-screen multiplayer FPS with a low poly art style, tons of stages and weapons, and couches. Even our special guest Polymars likes it. Polymars, you need to say your line. Polymars?
Say your line or I'll never let you out of the basement again.
Oh, would you look at the time? I guess I'll move on. And so the jam began on Monday, and the theme that they announced was huge. I like this theme. It isn't incredible, but at least it isn't some form of linked together for the 15,000th time. Besides, the real constraint for this game jam will be scoping my game to be simple enough to be able to create without the help of an engine. For those of you who don't know, not using an engine means I have to do a lot of things myself that are usually handled by Unity, like physics and rendering, and I also don't have access to tools like a stage editor or any sort of UI designer, and so I'm going to keep things simple for this game. My first thought was just to make a platformer, and I literally have not made a platformer in a jam since my second game jam ever, which is over 2 years ago, and you couldn't even jump in that game, so that wasn't even that much of a platformer. So I got a few things out of the way. 1. No camera movement. The game will be built with just one screen stages to keep it simple to develop. Then I had to come up with a gimmick, preferably one that included the theme huge. So I thought about possibly allowing you to pick up and carry a heavy box to walk on that slows you down when carried and you can use it for puzzles. But that just sounds really boring. And then I had the idea of making you getting knocked back from a huge gun the main movement mechanic. And I instantly realized that this was the absolute best course of action, and the concept of a comedically large Glock in the title, Barack and the Glock, followed suit. And ironically, I decided to keep the controls simple and just have moving left and right and shooting, removing jumping. So currently out of my 2 game jam platformers that I've made, I actually do not have jumping in either of them, which is the main feature of platformers. And to round out the first night, I just whipped together a glorious sprite. Beautiful. Although I'm going to submit the game through Replit as required, I'm going to stick to the VS Code simply because using an offline IDE generally just runs better. It actually ended up taking several hours for me to figure out how to install Python and Pygame and use it in VS Code, but we don't talk about that. And then it was time to learn how this whole Pygame thing works. Luckily for me, not only is the API super simple and well documented, but I also found a great tutorial on how to make a platformer, so I followed it for a while. Basically, the way that this game is going to be set up is that the levels are made in a 2-dimensional array, which is just a bunch of arrays within arrays, and each number in the array represents a type of block, 0 for air and 1 for blocks. When I start the game, I have a stage object that creates the stage by cycling through this array, and with that I have basic stage building without an engine. The player movement is pretty basic, with a gravity force and collision on the blocks, and the final thing I got to doing on Tuesday was shooting. In order to shoot, I have to make the bullets point at my mouse, which is something very basic in Unity with all of its built-in functions. But in order to do that in Pygame, I had to invoke the dark arts of trigonometry. Legends say that this is literally the only use of the unit circle outside of math class, but I simply use A10 to get the angle that I need to point the bullet in, and then in order to move the bullet, I switch those degrees into radians, and then I use sine and cosine functions to make those degrees into x and y floats, which I can add to the bullet's position every frame. Yay, trigonometry. So the first thing I did after getting to work on Wednesday was just adding knockback. The direction of the knockback was pretty easy to calculate. I just need to take the negative of the direction the bullet is going in. But then I had to make a dampening system and get it feeling good, and after a lot of messing around with the values of gravity and movement, I got pretty decent knockback working, and it is pretty fun to use. And now it is pretty fun to move around in the game. Well, that's an issue. When you go at high speeds, the player might clip through the boxes on the outside and just go flying, and this is a pretty common issue in games in 2D and 3D, and the solution that is usually used after normally checking for collisions is simply to make a raycast in between where the player is and where they are going to be after the movement is applied to this frame. If it passes through any walls, then collide with those walls. This keeps you from just flying through them, but the issue is that Pygame does not have a raycast, so they get around this and to come up with a slightly more complicated solution to the problem. If your player starts moving at a speed which is faster than the blocks that make up the game's width, then instead of just collision checking where the player is going to end up after applying movement this frame, I also loop through points in increments just smaller than the size of the boxes that make up the grid, and then I check collision there. And this prevents all clipping since everything in my game has the same collider size. Cleaning up collision took a massive amount of my time on Wednesday, but I managed to get bullet collision in as well as a counter for the bullets in the game, and I pretty much have all the fundamentals in the game now, so I'm going to get to work actually making the levels and systems that allow the core game loop to work. Building the groundwork for level creation was next, so I made a system for switching stages. It's very simple, it just clears the list of objects and then repopulates it with new ones based on the new stage. And I also added a door which moves you to the next level, as well as some targets that have to be destroyed before the door opens to bring you to the next level. Plus I added a counter for the bullets. And since I have the essentials in place, I'm going to make some levels. It kinda hit me that I need more objects, so I added a simple spike object that reloads the current level and also the ability to restart the level with the R key, and then it was back to level creation. The game currently feels kind of unsatisfying. I mean, it is a Glock that is significantly larger than the person holding it, so it should feel more powerful. So I added in some sound effects to the game. Most of the sound effects are made in BFXR, which is a free tool you can use to generate simple retro sounds. It's great for game jams, and for the gun sound I just used some of the ones that I'm using in Couch Combat. And for the first time ever, my game actually has original music as well. My friend who has a YouTube channel called Where made some music for the game. I generously slapped it into the game and then proceeded to turn it off for testing purposes. You can check him out in the description as he makes some other music, some of which has been featured in my videos before. The mainstay for making guns feel good in any game is screen shake, and it was surprisingly easy to do in Pygame, especially given the fact that I don't even have a camera system set up for this game. Instead of rendering the game directly to the window like I had been doing, I just rendered it to a surface the size of the window, which I can then apply screen shake to, and then I rendered that surface to the window. I finished off at beginning the creation of a tile set for the game. It'll be a pain to actually implement, but it'll make the game look so much better, so I'll do it. And unsurprisingly, switching the levels to a new tile set took forever. This is because the new tile set had about 30 tiles in it versus the old one's 5. Each tile is a number in the level editor, and since some of them have double digits and some don't, I had to account for that, and it took forever, but the game looks much nicer now and I updated all the levels. And I also added a speedrunning timer on Friday. It was pretty basic to make. It just works by taking the time at the beginning of the game and subtracting it by the time that you're at right now, and then it pauses that whenever you complete the game. And since now I have a speedrunning timer, I should probably make it so you can actually complete the game. I originally spent forever making the windscreen separate from the main game while loop, but it ended up messing up the rendering and I didn't really want to mess with that, so I just made it a level in the game. And whenever you enter this level, you get the text that just informs you of your winning status, and the timer stops too, so you can tell just how slow you are at completing the game. Finishing up the game was basically just adding in lots of small things. I added some basic animations to the player and flipped its sprite to face in the correct directions. I built a 5th stage and I fixed up some of the code to make it more readable. And the final thing I did on Saturday was adding a destructible box to the game, and this might just be the most revolutionary update I've ever made to any game I've ever made. It's a box, and whenever you touch it, it explodes. It was actually fairly complicated to code, and uses similar code to the knockback stuff for the player, but more importantly, it has no real use in the game. Nevertheless, it quickly became my favorite part of the game, and I made sure to make the boxes explode if the bullet hits them as well. For the last day, I just had to finish up the levels, add a bit more polish, and export the game. The last 3 levels took a decent amount of time to build as I had to use a new tile set, which kinda sucks to work with, but it made the game look much better. And then I made the game maximizable, and I also made it center itself in the screen no matter what size the screen is. I also moved the UI up a bit and moved the game down a bit, which works a lot better. And then it was time to export. And it turns out that exporting a Pygame game is really hard. In Unity, it's as simple as pressing a button, but I had to do some weird things in the command line, and then it didn't even work. But then I remembered something. I'm submitting this to Replit, and because I'm putting it on Replit, I can simply move my code over to the online IDE and just ended up having to change a few things. I didn't have to export it or anything. And the main thing I ended up having to change was just halving the resolution, as Replit displays Pygame in a pretty small resolution, but having the resolution was as easy as just cutting a few values in half, so it wasn't too big of a deal. And I'm really glad that I didn't have to actually export the game, plus it's cool that everybody can see the source code right next to the project in action on Replit. So be sure to check it out if you're interested in that kind of stuff, but be warned, the source code is messy. Oh, yeah, other people entered the jam too. Tech with Tim created Hugo the Huge in just 10 hours, a platformer built in Pygame. Vimlock built a game where you clean a massive skyscraper, and I'm fairly certain that he did it in Construct 3 and exported it to HTML. And Polymars made like a frog game or something? I don't know.
Okay, that's too far. I've had a busy schedule lately of being locked in Levin's basement, so I had just 10 hours to make my game. Can you let me go now, bud?
In order to make the game, Polymars used kaboom.js, which is a JavaScript programming library, and they are the ones who hosted the jam with Replit. I ended up using Pygame primarily because I already had experience with Python and stuff that I've been doing outside this channel, and learning JavaScript would have distracted even more from actually making the game. But if anybody was looking for an easy to use but flexible library for JavaScript to build games, then Kaboom is great. It even has the array-based level editor that I threw together built in, and it's a lot better than mine. So that's good to know, after messing around with my crappy one for so long. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Replit and Kaboom for sponsoring this video. And also thank you to Polymars for volunteering out of his own free will and for no other reason to feature in this video. It was a lot of fun participating in this jam. And whenever the final results come out and we figure out who actually won the money, I'll be sure to post that on my community tab, so subscribe to see who actually wins. Bye.